Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining the webinar on linguistically appropriate practice used to support our newcomer youth students who require EAL support. My name is LeeAnn Brownell, and I am the EAL consultant with HRCE. I am really hoping that this will be live, but I wanted to be prepared for anything, so I'm doing a recording just in case so that we can stick to the schedule. So a brief overview of what we'll be discussing today. We're going to talk about who our EAL students are that we're receiving in our schools these days, and how our classrooms and our schools can be incorporating linguistically appropriate practices in their everyday interactions and instructional practices with their students. So our language learners could be of any background. They could be permanent residents who have been trying to come to Canada for quite some time and are looking to become permanent residents, become eventually Canadian citizens. Some are permanent residents and they have come by way of refugee status, and others are temporary residents, which is they're here on either a work or a study permit. And they could also be Canadian-born children to families that have a different home language than English. And so based on an assessment, that determines if a student does require EAL support. It's very important to not make assumptions about our students and assume that because they have a different name or speak a different language at home, that they automatically need EAL. If those students might not understand a word or instructions at the beginning, that also doesn't mean that they automatically require EAL support. So it's just something that we want to be mindful of, that there are lots of bilingual and multilingual students in our classes these days that come from a variety of backgrounds. And so we really have to get to know our students as learners and knowing what they can do and where they need help with. And then we can go from there to determine if EAL is an appropriate support. I do just want to mention that there are students who are here as fee-paying students through the NSISP, Nova Scotia International Services Program, that currently we are not supporting. If you have students of this kind of status, then you are encouraged to reach out to whoever runs that program for your region and connect with them about supports for students paying tuition. So, like all students, they have various backgrounds, very unique, and same goes for our newcomer students. They have various educational backgrounds. They've had different levels of previous schooling, and some might come with different levels of literacy. And the last two are mostly to students who have a refugee background and may have had interrupted levels of schooling, which we'll discuss. So some students rather, they have attended school in their home countries. They have lots of prior knowledge and experiences. They've covered content that is pretty similar to us. So they know about, space, and maybe they know about flight or global warming or the water cycle. So they have that foundational knowledge. And so it's just a matter of new vocabulary in English. Some students are literate in their home language, and so this also supports the learning of English, no different than us. If we were to move away to Korea, for example, of course, we would rely on our English and what we already know about some content, and that is going to help us be successful in learning Korean. There are other groups of students who have had interruptions in their formal schooling. So maybe they were in a refugee camp. maybe they were traveling between countries, trying to escape a home country. Um, and so they may have not been attending school, or maybe they did attend school, but it wasn't formal, and maybe the teacher wasn't really a qualified, trained teacher. So everyone has very different experiences. Um, Maybe they have been receiving some instruction in English. Sometimes that instruction looks very different than it does in our schools. So it might be very rote, very literal. So uh, just a very diverse range of backgrounds that they're coming with. Um, some students who they might not have literacy skills in their home language, so they might only be able to speak their home languages and not necessarily be able to read and write in it. Um, of course, they can recognize what their language is when they see it. So if you want to go ahead and put signs up or something, uh, don't have the attitude that, oh, they won't know what it says. I think it's just a matter of them feeling that they are seen, they are valued, that their language is being, um, seen as, it's being respected and it's on display. So we'll get into ways of how you can incorporate some of this into your classrooms and your school environments. But to develop literacy skills in an additional language is much more challenging than if the literacy skills already exist in their home language, because they have that sense of uh, a code. And so this just highlights the importance of knowing our students. There was one teacher whose heart was really in the right place, and they took the time to translate some things for the student, only to find out that the student could not read their own language. So it's it kind of, affects that student, because they think, oh, I can't read my own writing, I can't read my own language, sorry. And then the teacher felt bad, and also just the time that went into that. So just very important to know our students and the literacy skills that they have in place. So some of you might be familiar with this conversational English, so just learning to speak with peers, um, just sort of everyday functional conversational English. It's approximately 1 to 2 years. And then academic English is around 5 to 7 years at least. I do want to highlight the fact that students that don't have literacy skills in their home language and that may have had interrupted formal education, it actually can take upwards of 9 to 10 years for those students to kind of be on par with peers and meeting outcomes independently, and sort of having developed a strong sense of English proficiency. So it is quite a journey. So, what exactly does it mean to be linguistically appropriate? Essentially, it means to value and include a student's home language and experiences as part of their classroom experience. So, it's about seeing what they can do in their home language as an asset to you, as being beneficial to acquire more English. Um, I often remind people, that to be multilingual or bilingual as an adult, it's seen as an asset. But yet, for some reason, when we have students in our classroom, it's not always seen um, through that same kind of lens. And I think it really should be. Um, it's important to make connections between a student's cultural background and bridging and development of new concepts, knowledge, and skills. And we'll get into the particulars and specific examples as we go on. And it's very also important to know that EAL learners should be doing what their counterparts are doing, but at a level that's appropriate for them. So gone are the days where you would expect, not even expect, but you would unfortunately see EAL students at the back of the class sitting on a computer with headphones on, doing their own thing, and the classroom teacher would say, "Oh, so and so's back on the computer. He can't do this, or he doesn't know what's going on. Um, she doesn't understand. She doesn't have that English yet." They're really, so fortunately, we haven't seen too much of this anymore. So that's great. People are being more aware, more proficient, which is awesome to see. But still, we still do have to reiterate that message that they should be doing what you're doing in class. It's not a separate EAL program where we come with a binder of vocabulary to do that's separate. It's sort of all weaved in and tied in and collaborative with the classroom teacher and what that content is. It's attached to context that means something and not some separate entity that has no connections to anything. So, valuing their home language and culture. We really try and make this kind of as simple and efficient for teachers to use. It's just tapping into that rich background experiences that students bring with them. And again, like I've just previously mentioned, sometimes I get ahead of myself. Um, it's just recognizing that they are becoming bilingual and multilingual and that they will bring skills with them. Go beyond just teaching about holidays and make sure that the materials that you choose or the stories you choose to read or use are maybe of diverse authors, diverse characters. These students have to see themselves represented in what you're doing in the class. Um, Bring in visitors, family members, welcome them into the classroom. Um, Art lessons, they could do poetry. Uh, Talk about holidays, for example. Even if you're at an older grade, uh, maybe you want to bring in members of the community that have had success. Maybe they were once newcomers and maybe they have been very successful. Maybe you want to bring them in um, as, sort of motivation, and so that those students see themselves like, okay, it's rough now, but it will get better. With hard work, we'll be successful. The public libraries and the school libraries have growing collections of dual language books and ebooks, and we always want to encourage them to use their home language. So sometimes it's, you're in Canada, it's English only now. In the beginning, definitely, we do have to encourage them to use their home language. Maybe there's a peer. Hopefully, there's a peer that speaks the same language. They are a great help to newly arrived students. But I get that there is a time and a place, and they are encouraged to actually just speak in English. But we want to just reiterate the fact that, especially in those beginning months, um, definitely they are encouraged to use their home language. So, what are some strategies? So, to create a safe and welcoming class, of course, we do that for all of our students. Pronounce their name correctly. A smile goes a long way. Um, and I know that sometimes their names can be difficult for us to pronounce, or the sounds, we can't make them, whatnot. What I really mean is make an attempt and don't just say, to Muhammad, well, your name's Mo now. um, don't come up with nicknames and shortened versions of their names, but go by what their name is or what their preferred name is and really try your best. I know sometimes with the younger students, it's a little bit trickier because they don't necessarily understand uh, the idea of accents. And so we're saying their name as best as we possibly can. We're not saying it necessarily incorrectly, but we might not be saying it, of course, how it sounds when their parents say it. And so that can always be a little tricky. If you have a student that speaks the same language, use that person as a peer or buddy support to help the new arrived student. learn a couple greetings in their home language. So, hello, goodbye, thank you, come here, um, things like that. It shows that you're caring and that you understand their language, and they always react usually with a little smile to that. So that's nice. Using visual schedules, so or just having visuals nearby for bathroom, snacks, drinks if they feel sick. So kind of like those basic needs, I guess, that might arise throughout the day. And cooperative learning opportunities, group work. Um, I know research everywhere says, about the benefits and the power behind cooperative learning opportunities. HRCE recently did a survey with newcomer students. Now, mind you, that was grade 7 to 12. Um, but there were a fair amount of results that they had shared that said, we like group work. So they like being in groups with their English peers. They make friends. It helps them understand what they're doing, the new vocabulary. Um, so if you're doing group work, that's awesome. Keep it up. If you're not, maybe make that a goal for 2023 to start upping that in your classroom practices, because it really is beneficial to the students and they like it. Sometimes we feel a little bit awkward because we think, oh, how are they going to feel? They're in a group with people who speak English and maybe they're still very quiet and reserved at this point. You don't think they'll understand, but it's just about making those connections and increasing that exposure. So, very important. Um, there is a kind of a quote that says, if you teach everybody like they are language learners, everyone benefits. Um, so we have synonymous tags and repetition. This is kind of a fancy word for just giving synonyms. So if you have that academic, or maybe, so if you have that academic word, piggyback that with an easy word. So injure, hurt, role of the digestive system, job of the digestive system. Describe, explain, tell me more about. I once had a student say, I gave the academic word. She goes, okay, miss, that's good, but give me that cheap word. I need the cheap word. She goes, I need the expensive word, but she goes, the cheap word helps me. So that's always good. Um, and it's not just limited to students that don't speak English at home. There are lots of students in our classroom these days that are not exposed to sort of some of that rich higher level vocabulary that will greatly benefit from this. The use of visuals, very, very important. In one of these other sessions I had done, I was asked, well, there there's something to be said, that it could be overstimulating and whatnot. And yes, I agree. You guys have a lot of different learners in your rooms. So I just say be very purposeful in the visuals you choose and make sure they're current. So if your student is no longer at the early beginning stage, but they've been here for a while and still benefit. Like maybe they've been here for 6, 9 months and they still, of course, benefit from visuals, but they don't necessarily need the ones that were up when they first arrived. So I think I just encourage you to, again, just be purposeful with the visuals. If you're doing anchor charts, a lot of these anchor charts, laminate them, keep them. And then you have them and you bring them out as needed. But very important, clear language. So just be mindful of the words you're using and how quickly you are saying them. We don't have to talk really slow and we don't have to talk really loud, but we might want to slow it down a bit and we might want to be very clear. Maybe we want to just chunk what we're saying to them, especially when you're using a translator. Don't give them multiple instructions or directions or say 5 things in a row and then hit translate. Make sure, say a clear phrase, make sure they get it, and go about it that way. Body language, gestures, and facial expressions. Because they don't yet have that vocabulary, um, they'll be very in tune, I guess, with and quick to pick up on gestures and facial expressions in your body language. So just try and be patient and warm and welcoming. I know sometimes it can be difficult when we're trying to communicate something and we're struggling. I have been guilty of it, trying to communicate something, and I don't feel like, or I know they're not understanding it, and I'll become frustrated with myself, not the student. How can I make this more clear? What am I missing? And so then I'll feel bad because maybe I've sighed or I've rolled my eyes or I've gone, um, that's not directed to the student. It's my own level of frustration in being able to communicate. However, they don't know that. And then that's even more to try translate. It's not you, it's me. So yeah, just be very mindful of that. And the wait time, again, this is kind of, number one rule is give them time to formulate an answer. There's a lot going on in their brains. Um, and usually you can tell when they're trying to process something, you can see it in their face and their eyes versus when they really aren't quite sure. Um, so just be mindful to give them some time to kind of generate an answer or show some level of understanding, demonstrate some level of understanding. This is also very, very helpful. Show them examples of a final project or assignment. So whether that be a piece of writing or a poem or something hands-on, uh, very, very handy for them to know what the expectation is, what they're trying to do. So any kind of model or example you can provide is a huge help. Here are a few examples of how we've incorporated home language into schools. So where we see this tree and some kind of little posters up around the tree, this I believe was at Grosvenor Wentworth in the front entrance. So it's the I Wonder wall. And so periodically they would change the I wonder question, and they have it in different languages, and they have a different thing for the students to wonder about. And that kind of brings the students together, and they talk and they say, oh, say that in your language there. Or maybe they've met a new person at the wall who speaks their language and they didn't know, someone in another class or grade. And they're reading their language and they didn't realize, oh my gosh, we're the same. That's great. So it's just, again, showing that respect and value to their home language, and also showing the importance of them maintaining their home language and making those connections. The second one is kind of like that multicolored list. This was in a class with a student from Mexico, and the students themselves created this dual language list. So whenever there was a word that the student didn't know or that the other kids thought they should know, they made a list so that either group, English speaking or Spanish speaking, could refer back to this list. So, and this was just on a easel or an Angler chart, and they just kept flipping it, and it grew until didn't really need it anymore. The better word wall, which is right here, if you can still see my cursor. When students, this was a grade 6 class, and they were always being encouraged to come up with richer words, more descriptive language in their writing pieces. But again, it wasn't just limited to students learning English. This was all students. The teacher was reporting they were just using the same old boring words. So they're smart, they're nice, they're funny. So we came up with the better word wall, and it is in English and Korean. And so we've got Korean underneath the initial word, I guess. And then in the pocket is different words with their language on the bottom in Korean, sorry, for that word. So instead of nice, it might be kind, thoughtful, caring. Smart might be clever, intelligent. So this went off really, really well, and it really benefited. There was a couple Korean students in that class, and so not only were the English-speaking students going and choosing better words, it was also helping with that vocabulary development for the students who spoke Korean as a home language. And the last one was grade 1 class, and we were doing sort of letter sounds, and we had a student that spoke Turkish and a student that spoke Spanish, and we were phonetically sounding out some of the words. And so we would do it in English, and then we would do it in Spanish. The Spanish student would do it in Spanish, the Turkish student would do it in Turkish, and then we would all do it in English. And so they were making comparisons. So, for example, if there was a butterfly, butterfly in Turkish is kelebek. So we would have to identify some of those major sounds like the k, l, b, r, ek. And so when they know what the word means, they're connecting that to something. And then sometimes some of the words were so similar, like elephant was similar, I think, in Turkish, English, and Spanish. So that is actually called a cognate, Cognate. And that's another strategy for helping students learn in English. When words sound similar in their language as it does in English, it also makes vocabulary development. It also improves vocabulary. I do just want to come back and touch on this. I have done this for years with students, have them phonetically spell out some of the words in their language and then in English. And I personally have had great success with it. The students love it. They love hearing their language. They love trying to sound it out. So I really encourage you to try this with your students. So for some of the older students, we do have at HRCE library anyhow, we do have some of the classics and some of the Shakespeare books available in their language. Although I don't know how many are still reading classics. So you're also encouraged to maybe have them find a book in their home language. If you're doing literature circles, maybe choose a text level that's a little bit more appropriate. Maybe there's some graphic novels available for a book you're doing. Maybe there is a translated version of it. There are becoming more and more options out there. The other image is of the student was in grade 10 English, and they had to analyze a poem or song lyric. So again, using his home language, he found a song in Russian and made some connections to it. And then in English, his writing piece was done in English. So again, just using that home language to support. Some schools have done a language or a cultural club. So it's kind of when you create a task force of students that are bilingual and multilingual. So they do not necessarily have to have been or currently are students receiving EAL. There are lots of other students in our classes that have never required support with their English because they're just bilingual, multilingual. And it's really nice if they become part of a group that supports newly arrived students. I did this for a couple of years. It did get interrupted with work to rule there a couple of years ago. But we created signs and we put them around in front of the office and the libraries, the washrooms, the gymnasium. And it was in multiple languages. So I think it was, 6 or 7 languages on a sheet, and we had them all laminated and put them around. Create artwork for the classes, the hallways and the entrances. They can act as translators and interpreters for non-sensitive information. So I went around to grades 4 to 6 and just asked, who spoke another language and who would be interested in helping some of our newly arrived students. Um, and so they put their name down. And so in the event we had a new student, in grade 2 who might have been crying or upset or forgot something, who knows, then we could say, oh, well, Yasmin in grade 6 also speaks that language. So let's go get Yasmin and see if we can find out how we can help the student that's upset. So again, it was for kind of non-sensitive information. Not all the time do they have siblings. Sometimes, well, they just don't have siblings or they're at a different school. So that's kind of next best. It's also a great idea to involve them in assemblies and bring some different voices and some diversity to school assemblies. So we're just going to go back here and talk about the impact of visuals. This was a little rhyming on the word family OAT. And so this gives some, again, level of understanding. Little goat in a boat. Well, prior to those visuals, they don't know what a goat is and they don't know what a boat is. So now they do. So visuals are always important. Here we have a grade 3 class. They had brainstormed together some characteristics, I guess, of fairy tales, and words on a page don't necessarily mean anything. However, when you put up these images next to those words, you can clearly identify what the topic is. Another thing that would be culturally and linguistically appropriate would be to have students refer to fairy tales of their home country. Maybe some of them are similar to what we are familiar with, and maybe they have different ones. I know I worked with a student in grade 5 from the Philippines on fairy tales, and as soon as I translated the word, she was off and running, and she pulled up a YouTube video of a popular fairy tale, and she had no troubles at all with that unit. She was actually quite engaged. So, impact of visuals is high. We talked about synonymous tags, and so this could be used in speaking or visually represented. So it's just about giving them a richer, more expensive word. So this was well received by all the students actually in the room. And again, just other examples of use of first language. So this student was writing the words for these visuals in English and Croatian. And then the visuals here, these were some, I forget what the activity was, but I know that the vocabulary list had been created by the classroom teacher. And so when we were in the room doing the lesson, this would have been something that was appropriate for the student. I think they had to know what some of these words were before they could do the work. And so we made those connections between English, Arabic, and then had the images. So yes, we want to allow and encourage the use of the first language, and translation is okay. However, this is a scaffold, and as their language progresses, the use of the translator should start to wane. And that is not anything we want to become a crutch. I know that at times can be challenging, but nevertheless. Novel study examples. So I don't know how often novel studies are being done as whole class novel studies. I think that people are encouraged and have moved away from that, but I think it does still happen. There was a student that the class was doing a whole class novel study, and the student was very bright, educated, just didn't yet have the level of English to participate. And so I got him a novel from the public library, and it was in his language. And I just created a novel study. So I worked with the classroom teacher to say, okay, what are the outcomes? What do you want the student to be able to achieve and understand and demonstrate through this novel study? And so I created a thing that the student could work on relatively independently. And it was just about identifying the setting and who the characters are and what the conflict and the solution and maybe how is the character changed. So different kinds of things. Um, this one I can see it can be tough because sometimes at the very, very beginning, when they don't necessarily have the language, it's hard for them to participate um, because we want them doing a novel study. So they do a novel study based on the book that they can read. And typically at the very beginning, it's in their home language. But yet, we also want them to be participating in group work and having that experience and making those connections, which happens typically when you have, you know, different novels and you do literature circles, or even if you are still doing the whole class novel, um, that does lend itself. So, but I think nevertheless, however you do it, when you are doing a novel study, the class is given time to read independently, so the student can still read their book independently, and they are still having to do different types of work uh, for their novel study. So, same thing. Many popular stories and novels are available in multiple languages at public libraries. Even Amazon, I will say that Amazon, some of the books translated can be quite expensive. So if you know that there's a novel study coming up and you've got language learners in your class, this does require some planning ahead. HRCE Library has some titles, and Sora, which is in your GNS PES waffle, also has a small collection of texts in other languages. Um, Not all regions purchase titles through Sora, and I'm not sure who does and who doesn't, but HRCE does. So that is another option. There is a way to translate the books. The translation's a little questionable. Better than nothing, I guess, but I think there are a fair amount of options between what you could purchase, what you could sign out of the public library. They have a huge collection of books in multiple languages as ebooks and as hard copy, and then Sora. So basically, in summary, linguistically appropriate practice is just about valuing and respecting and using the student's home language and experiences to help them learn a new language and just having them part of the class. Honor and allow their home language, and highlight and make connections between students' cultural backgrounds and development of new concepts, knowledge, and skills. Sometimes it's as easy as, if you're talking about a new word and just asking them, hey, how do you say that in Arabic? How do you say that in Korean? How do you say that in Swahili? And that's a great way to just help them understand what you're talking about and showing that you do value their language. And again, they really should be doing the same thing as their English counterparts, only at a level that is appropriate for them. So I think that is it. I wanted to, if you have any questions, you can email me at lbrownell@hrce.ca, or you can email Peru with any questions. Thank you so much for taking the time to join this session. And again, if you had to watch this recording, I'm very, very sorry I wasn't able to make it live and in person. But nevertheless, I hope this did the trick. All right. Thank you. Take care.